if it's true that Philippine national politics has been very Manila-centric over the past century, then why is it the case that people who live outside Manila still feel motivated enough to politically participate in a system that theoretically is designed to marginalize their voices? Why do they vote? It's an interesting question that I've been thinking a lot about, and I want to share some of my thoughts out loud. And again, this is just me giving some suggestions and some questions so that perhaps you can, in your own head, can also think about them and process them and engage with them as we approach the upcoming elections in around, a year from now. I think Philippine national politics is such an interesting field of sorts, because it's something that I think most people only really think about for a very short period of time, which is right before the elections happen, and then you end up forgetting it. But I think it's important for us to engage with the history, engage with the political history, and think a bit more about all of this stuff, because again, it will influence all of our lives for the next almost for the next 6 years. And yeah, so I think this is quite important to think about, even just to kind of have a little more think a little more critically about this. And obviously what I'm saying, this isn't necessarily the truth. I'm just giving my own thoughts about it, and I'm still in the process of trying to understand this stuff as well. So I'm just trying to think about them out loud, and hopefully we can all learn together. So again, the question is, why are people, if it's true that people feel like there's a sense of a Manila centricism, a thing that may have contributed to Duterte's presidential victory in 2016, why is it then the case that people still participate in the vote? It's interesting because the idea of voting is something that isn't necessarily the most, actually in Philippine history, there have been many movements of sorts that have been pushing to have people protest the vote or boycott the vote. And for maybe one of the more recent ones, or not recent ones, but one of the more prominent ones was, I think, the CCP, the Communist Party of the Philippines, wanted to boycott the vote of, I think, 1981, and with 1981 with Marcos, and I think also 1986 with Marcos Aquino. They wanted to boycott the vote, and they pushed for people to boycott it. But in general, it's interesting because there's a sense for some people, and I'm sure this is common, where you feel like, what's the point of me voting if the person who I end up voting for and number one, doesn't really do any of the things that they promise, and number two, none of the candidates seem like they actually represent me or my ideas and my thoughts, and so what's the point of actually participating? It's interesting because in the political science world, how they analyze Philippine politics, they don't use the same terminology that most people think about when they think of voting and politics. They don't talk much about liberal democracy, for example. It's very much, they use lots of jargon, but they use terms that make it seem like their existence is antithetical to democracy. So what I mean is that, I've been reading this book called Introduction to Philippine Politics, which was published by University of the Philippines Press under the Third World Center, I think. And they describe things in Philippine politics with terms like patron-client relations, or clientelism, or bossism, where they're not really democratic institutions. So, and it's a weird thing to grapple with. So I'll try to summarize some of this stuff. So for example, one of the ways that people understand Philippine politics for political scientists is this idea that most people are motivated to vote because they get something in return, and they're promised something by their local kind of politicians, in a way that, or they get favors from them, or they get specific things, for example, cash give outs, or I will vote for you, you give me 500 pesos, you give me 1,000 pesos, and that's how you'll get my vote. Because there's a strong, I guess, it's a combination of a cynicism towards the whole political system at large, and a pragmatism about how, if I'm not going to get anything out of this anyway, might as well get something by voting and getting money from it that I can use to support my family and support my children's education and all this stuff. And this is quite common in many provinces here in the Philippines. And when you kind of trace the development of the power structures in different parts of the Philippines, it feels like usually there are these political clans, these families that have had power in a certain area for a very long time, and the only way that how they're able to kind of maintain their power is by continuously giving these out of pocket, but probably just from their own taxes, but giving back money to the people in a way that makes it seem like it came from their goodwill, and if they're using that amount of money, they'll say, well, okay, I'll give you 1,000 pesos, I'll give you a certain amount of money, and you know that you're gonna have to support me in my policies and support me in my run. And how it works on the national scale is that individual politicians would then have to, given that the local politicians consolidate their power through these patron-client relationships where they promise specific material goods often to specific people, and then in return for their loyalty. On a national scale, it's very similar as well, where this person who wants to be president will say to this mayor of this town or this governor, I will give you a good situation in the new government. I'll either improve your status or I'll give you a cut or something, and based on what I give you, if you give me the votes of your city, if your town, if your barangay or whatever it is, then I will kind of return the favor when I'm in office. And this is true for all over the world as well, but it's interesting to think about because this kind of idea completely removes any sense of the individual citizen voting for what they think is good for the country. That is totally out of the equation completely, because people end up voting for what is good for their short term, which is, makes sense, because if you feel like the political system is designed to, to not really think about what you, not really care about what you think, they might as well get something out of it, because when you feel like the broader structure of society is not there supporting you, then you end up feeling like, well, I have to support myself somehow. And so if you're voting for Bina will give me like a fancy cake, whatever, you can feed me, it's this very weird situation, because it seems like the more you take a micro perspective on Philippine politics, when you actually look at it carefully, the more anti-democratic it actually appears and looks. And it becomes even difficult to say which one would have come first. Is it the sense that politics doesn't care about me, therefore I'll care for myself before thinking about the rest of the country? Or is corruption first, or is cynicism first, or is it the idea that I can be bought with my sense of my ability to influence national politics can be purchased? Like, which one would have come first? Because they bleed into each other. It's like a cycle, and it becomes a bit more complicated. So a short way to answer the earlier question was like, well, why do people vote? Because often it's because they feel like they get something in return, which is in the short term, as opposed to anything in the long term. Because unfortunately for many people, the long term isn't something they can't really see, or it's not certain for many people. So the short term is the best that they can do. But it becomes difficult, because when you're in the system where the average individual who needs short-term help relies on these kind of relationships with their local officials in order to sustain themselves, it's in the best interest of the people in government to keep you in a state of needing support, or like needing my help to make you prosper. Because so what ends up happening is it becomes like a mafia type situation where, like, okay, your safety, your health care, your well-being, your food, all of it is dependent on whoever is running your local government. You're in the provinces or whatever it is, whether it's like the dynastic political family or whatever it is. You will become very reliant on them, and your reliance on them guarantees that they will get your support. That's why, like, if you look at how people vote, they often vote in blocks in the Philippines. Like, let's say the North goes to Marcos, wherever, every place has like a certain block of place. And how that works again is like, it's a lot of political alliances. It's like political people because they are able to promise you something that you need, they are guaranteed certain votes that they can also give to people who are aiming for higher positions. Like, say, I'll give you the votes of my province if you give me this, and it kind of just goes on this cycle. And it's frustrating, but also difficult to see how to kind of go around it, because it's something that seems to have been in place for a very long time. And when people talk about political dynasties, it's easy to think nationally, but really political dynasties are more of a problem locally, and like local provinces, local cities, not in Manila, or Manila as well, but all over the country. and becomes a bit complicated, because if you want to kind of trace the development of like political dynasties, you'd have to go all the way back to the times of the Datus, you know, hundreds of years ago, where it's always just been that way in the Philippines because of how we were very isolated from each other, and you know, we were very singular in terms of this in our tribes, in our kind of communities, in a way that power was consolidated in a small number of people back in the day, and it just kept staying in that little circle. And the thing is, like I said, it's actually not beneficial to me to actually improve your well-being to the point that you can survive without my dependence, because I need you to need me so that I can have enough power to maintain my position and allow me to be benefited from the people who are above me, who can buy the support of my people for them. And you kind of get this weird hierarchy of situations of sorts where, you know, political dynasties really are a big part of the issue, but also the system behind the politics. So if you think of it in a very micro scale, the average person's like, well, I'll vote for this person because this person will give me 1,000 pesos. Okay, makes sense. Then if you go above that, the person says, the person who's like giving you that 1,000 pesos says, well, I need to give these people 1,000 pesos each so they can vote for me, so that I can sell my votes to whoever is running for president. It's a weird cycle, and it's weird to see, like, exactly, it seems so deeply ingrained that it's difficult to see how to get out of it. And you know, I think about it a lot, and it's difficult really to find a way to remove that, because you can say, for example, you know, every 6 years we have these things where we like, I want to vote for this person will change the Philippine system, this person will do this, or this person will do that. But the reality is the problems are so deeply ingrained that the average person is not going to be able to destroy the deeply rooted you know, political structures that have existed for hundreds of years in different ways and in different local contexts in every single city around the country. It's such a, you know, it's such a mess of sorts, but it's also you know, it's something that is actually the root of the problem. And again, it is in the best interest of the people who want to maintain their power, to keep their people satiated but not like prosperous, not flourishing enough to the point that they do not need the support. So it's a weird situation, and you know, you know, if you look at the world of like the politics and how people kind of, yeah, I don't know, it is very complicated. But yeah, I'll think about it more. I think you should think about it as well. This idea that, you know, what exactly is a vote, and why do people vote? Everyone votes in their own ways, and theoretically in a democracy it's meant for representation, it's meant for being able to participate in the political process, it's meant to have a way to influence, blah blah blah. But all those things are very theoretical, but in practice people mostly vote because it benefits them in the short term, and in a way that also, it's like you're conditioned to be that way because your situation is so bad, or not like, you know, for most of the people in the country. So yeah, one of the interesting things, for example, that I was talking about last week with Manila centricism is this idea that, like, the Manila vote is very important. The NCR vote is arguably the most important vote of the country, and there's like a contradiction, because we talked about like how Duterte, for example, one of the reasons why he won, according to what I said last week, was like, well, Duterte, you know, there's a sense that he's from Mindanao, and therefore he does not represent the Manila elite, the political elite that has been dominating national politics for the past 100 years. So he got lots of votes from Mindanao. He consolidated the Mindanao vote. He got some votes in the north by, you know, and he was also able to get some support from Jose Maria Cis on the CCP, and this idea of like the Maguindanao issue. He seemed like someone who could be better able to fix that issue because he has communication with the leaders of the different groups there. But one of the things that it's easy to kind of like forget, but it happened 6 years ago, is that Duterte also got the Manila vote. He got the NCR vote. He got it by a decently wide margin. And actually, the person who wins the NCR vote, the Manila vote, usually wins the presidential election. If you go back Noy Noy got the NCR vote, Gloria against FPJ got the NCR vote, Erap against, he won by quite a large margin, but against like Jose de Venecia and everyone, he got the NCR vote. And then Cory Aquino versus Marcos. Cory Aquino got the NCR vote, not Marcos. The only one who got the NCR vote but didn't win was Miriam Defensor Santiago in 1992, and it was a very like thin margin, and Ramos ended up winning with like less than a quarter of the total votes. But anyway, we'll continue, I guess, next week.